No way back. It started with an invitation. A simple white envelope lay on the kitchen table when Mark came home from work. His wife, Anna, stood by the window, arms crossed. She did not turn around when he entered. "I see we got something in the mail," Mark said, tossing his keys onto the counter. He picked up the envelope, turned it over, and saw the elegant handwriting. "Mr. and Mrs. Van Loon request the pleasure of your company for dinner." Mark frowned. "Van Loon, do we know them?" Anna sighed. "Apparently we do now." She finally turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable, calm, but with something hidden beneath the surface. "Who are they?" Mark asked. Anna took the envelope from his hand and placed it back on the table, as if it were something fragile. "They're new in town. Very rich. They bought the big house on the hill. You know, the one with the iron gates." Mark nodded. Everyone in town had noticed the new owners. The house had been empty for years, and then, suddenly, expensive cars appeared in the driveway. People talked. Some said the Van Loons were business people from Amsterdam. Others said they had left the city in a hurry, running from something. No one knew for sure. "Why would they invite us?" Mark asked. Anna gave a small shrug. "I don't know. Maybe they want to meet people. Maybe they think we are interesting." Mark laughed. "Us? Interesting?" Anna didn't laugh. She looked at him, waiting for his answer. "Do you want to go?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." "All right," Mark said, taking off his jacket. "Then we'll go." That night, as they ate dinner, the invitation sat on the table between them. Neither of them spoke about it again, but Mark had a strange feeling in his stomach. It was not excitement. It was something else. Something was going to happen at that dinner. Something important. Something they could not escape. The night of the dinner arrived. Mark adjusted his tie in the mirror, but no matter how many times he straightened it, it still felt wrong. He glanced at Anna. She wore a black dress, simple but elegant, and a silver necklace he had bought her years ago. She looked calm, but Mark knew her well enough to see the tension in her shoulders. "Ready?" he asked. Anna nodded, but she didn't smile. They drove through the quiet town, past the bakery, the empty church, and the dark windows of the bookstore. As they reached the hill, the houses became larger, the streets wider. The Van Loon house stood at the very top, its tall iron gates open, as if expecting them. A man in a black suit stood at the entrance. He was not smiling. "Good evening," he said as they stepped out of the car. "Mr. and Mrs. Van Loon are expecting you." Mark and Anna exchanged a glance, but said nothing. The man led them up the stone path, past perfectly trimmed hedges, and a fountain where water flowed silently. The house was enormous, with high windows and heavy curtains drawn back. Warm golden lights spilled out onto the driveway. Inside, the air smelled of expensive perfume and something else, something faint but sharp, like burnt wood. The entrance hall was larger than their entire apartment. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, sparkling as if made of real diamonds. A woman in a red dress appeared at the top of the stairs, holding a glass of wine. She smiled, her eyes scanning them like a teacher inspecting new students. "You must be Mark and Anna," she said as she descended. "Welcome to our home." Mark stepped forward and shook her hand. "Mrs. Van Loon." She laughed. "Oh no, call me Marielle." Mark noticed her fingers were cold. Another figure appeared from a doorway, a tall man with gray hair, dressed in a dark suit. He moved slowly, but there was something powerful about him, as if he was used to people waiting for him to speak. "My husband," Marielle said. "This is Richard." Richard Van Loon extended his hand. His grip was strong, and his eyes, blue and sharp, studied Mark for a long moment before he turned to Anna. "Anna," he said, his voice smooth and controlled, "we finally meet." Mark frowned. "Finally?" Anna's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. "Come," Marielle said, touching Mark's arm lightly. "Let's have a drink before dinner." They followed her through the grand hallway, their footsteps echoing against the marble floor. Mark's stomach tightened. Something about this place, about these people, felt wrong. And the way Richard had looked at Anna, like he already knew her, like he had been waiting for this night. The drawing room was large, with high ceilings and walls lined with bookshelves. A fire burned in the grand fireplace, though the night wasn't cold. The furniture was old but luxurious, dark wood, deep red velvet. The kind of room that made Mark feel small, like he had entered a world he did not belong to. A servant appeared, silent as a shadow, and poured them each a glass of red wine. Marielle raised hers. "To new friendships." Anna hesitated before clinking glasses. Mark noticed it, but so did Richard. The older man sat in a leather armchair, one leg crossed over the other, watching Anna with something unreadable in his expression. "So," Mark said, forcing a smile, "you must have lived in Amsterdam before coming here?" Marielle nodded. "Yes, for many years. But the city became difficult." "Difficult how?" Richard took a sip of his wine. "Too many eyes." Mark frowned. "Too many eyes." Richard let out a small, humorless chuckle. Forgive me. What I mean is, in the city, people watch. They gossip. They ask questions." Mark wasn't sure what to say to that. He turned to Anna, expecting her to fill the silence, but she was staring at her wine glass. Marielle smiled at her. "Anna, I must say, you look just as I remember." Anna's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. Mark's breath caught. "As you remember," he repeated. "You've met before." There was a pause. Then Anna spoke, her voice quiet. "A long time ago." Mark turned to her. "When?" Anna's lips parted slightly, but Richard interrupted. "That's why we invited you," he said smoothly. "To reconnect. Old friends should not be strangers." Old friends. Mark looked at Anna again, waiting for an explanation. But she only looked down, as if studying the patterns in the carpet. "I didn't know you knew the Van Loons," Mark said. His voice was steady, but something cold was creeping into his chest. Anna finally met his eyes. "I didn't think it was important." Richard's smile was slow, amused. "Everything is important, Mark." Silence fell between them. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed. Marielle placed a gentle hand on Anna's wrist. "Dinner is ready." Anna flinched at her touch. Mark noticed, and suddenly he understood something. Anna was afraid. But afraid of what? Or of who? The dining room was as grand as the rest of the house. A long table stretched across the room, set with fine china, silver cutlery, and tall crystal glasses. A golden chandelier hung above them, casting a warm glow over the polished wood. The scent of roasted meat and spices filled the air, but Mark barely noticed it. His mind was elsewhere, on Anna, on Richard's strange smile, on the feeling that he had walked into something much bigger than a simple dinner invitation. A servant pulled out Anna's chair for her, and she hesitated before sitting down. Marielle sat at one end of the table, Richard at the other. Mark and Anna were placed in between, as if they were guests of honor, or prisoners being carefully watched. Plates were set before them. The food looked perfect, almost too perfect. Mark picked up his knife and fork, but his appetite had vanished. "So," Richard said, cutting into his steak with slow precision, "how long have you two been married?" Mark swallowed. 8 years. Richard nodded thoughtfully, chewing his food. "And yet, in all those years, Anna never mentioned us." Mark felt his jaw tighten. "No, she didn't." Silence. A small smile played on Richard's lips. Anna set her knife down. "This isn't necessary," she said softly. "Oh, but it is," Marielle replied, her voice smooth as silk. "We've waited a long time for this evening, Anna. Don't you think we deserve a little honesty?" Mark turned to his wife. "Anna, what are they talking about?" Anna's hands were in her lap. He could see her fingers twisting together, something she did only when she was nervous. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Richard leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. "Tell me, Mark, how much do you really know about your wife?" Mark's grip on his fork tightened. "I know everything I need to know." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" Something in his tone made Mark's stomach twist. He turned to Anna again. "What is going on?" Anna let out a slow breath. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I knew them. A long time ago. Before I met you." Mark felt his heart pound. "How?" Anna's eyes flickered to Richard, then to Marielle, then back to Mark. "It's complicated." Richard chuckled. "Oh, it's not that complicated. Anna was part of our world once." Mark's pulse quickened. "What world?" "The kind of world where people like you don't ask too many questions," Richard said smoothly. "And where people like Anna don't leave so easily." The words sent a chill down Mark's spine. He looked at Anna, searching her face for answers. "What is he talking about?" Anna didn't answer, because suddenly the air in the room felt different, like the doors had silently locked, like they were not guests at this dinner, but captives. Mark's knife clinked against his plate as he set it down. His appetite was completely gone. Across the table, Richard took another slow sip of wine, his gaze steady on Anna. Anna sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She looked like she wanted to run. "Anna," Mark said, his voice low but firm, "tell me." Richard chuckled. "Oh, she won't. But I will." Anna inhaled sharply. "Richard, stop." Richard ignored her. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on Mark. "Your wife," he said, "was once someone else. Someone very different from a woman sitting next to you now." Mark's skin went cold. He turned to Anna. "Is that true?" Anna looked at him, her eyes filled with something between guilt and fear. "Yes." Mark's breath caught. His fingers curled into fists on the table. "What does that mean? Different how?" Richard smiled, slow and knowing. "Anna, would you like to explain?" Anna pushed her chair back slightly, but Marielle spoke before she could move. "Stay," she said, her voice gentle but firm. Anna hesitated. Then slowly she sat back down. Richard took his time, cutting another piece of meat, chewing, swallowing. Then he spoke again, his voice calm, almost amused. "Mark, you live a quiet life, don't you?" Mark narrowed his eyes. "What does that have to do with anything?" Richard smirked. "Because you wouldn't understand Anna's past." You wouldn't understand what it's like to be part of something bigger, something dangerous. Mark felt his pulse in his ears. Dangerous. Richard nodded. Your wife was once involved in things most people only hear about in whispers. In back rooms. In coded messages. Mark's stomach turned. What are you saying? Richard tilted his head. I'm saying Anna wasn't always a schoolteacher's wife in a small town. Mark looked at Anna, desperate for an answer. Anna. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were filled with something heavy. I was part of something, she admitted. A long time ago. Before you. Before all of this. Mark's throat was dry. Part of what? Anna hesitated. Then, finally, she whispered, a network. Mark stared at her. A network. Anna swallowed hard. People who move things. Sold things. Information. Money. Secrets. Mark's chest tightened. Illegal things. Anna didn't answer, but the silence told him enough. Richard leaned back in his chair, satisfied. And then one day she disappeared. Just like that. She ran, changed her name, built a new life. Mark felt like the floor beneath him had cracked. He had been married to Anna for 8 years. He knew her. Didn't he? You lied to me, he whispered. Anna shook her head. No. I just... Richard cut in smoothly. She left without paying her debts, Mark. And now... He smiled. Now it's time to settle them. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Mark's hands were cold. What do you mean? He asked. Marielle sipped her wine. Oh, Mark, she said softly. Did you really think this was just dinner? Mark's breath felt shallow. The warmth of the fire, the glow of the chandelier, the rich smell of wine and roasted meat, none of it mattered anymore. The only thing he could focus on was the weight of Richard's words. Now it's time to settle them. Anna's past wasn't just a story. It wasn't something she had left behind. It was here, sitting across from them, smiling like an old friend who had never truly gone away. Mark swallowed hard. What do you want from us? Richard tapped his fingers against the table, as if considering the question. Then he smiled. From you? Nothing. He turned his gaze to Anna. From her? Well, that's another story. Anna's hands were clenched in her lap. You don't get to decide that. Richard chuckled. Oh, Anna, you know that's not true. Marielle leaned forward, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass. You took something when you left, Anna. Something very valuable. Mark felt his stomach drop. Took, he repeated. Anna didn't look at him. Richard nodded. Yes. A rather large sum of money. You could call it a severance package, though none of us agreed to it. Mark turned to his wife. Anna? Is that true? Anna's fingers twitched, but she didn't deny it. Richard smiled wider. Ah, now you see, Mark. Your wife isn't just someone who left her past behind. She stole from it. Mark felt dizzy. How much? Richard sipped his wine before answering. 1 million euros. The room went silent. Mark stared at Anna. 1 million. Anna's jaw tightened. I had no choice. Richard shook his head. There is always a choice. Mark ran a hand through his hair, his mind spinning. His wife, his Anna, had stolen a fortune from dangerous people. People who clearly hadn't forgotten. Mark's voice was hoarse. What do you want? The money? We don't have it. Richard smiled. Oh, we know that. Mark's skin prickled. Then what? Marielle's voice was soft. "We want her." The word sent a cold shock through Mark's body. He turned to Anna, panic rising in his throat. "No," he said immediately. "That's not happening." Richard sighed, as if Mark were a child who didn't understand the rules of a game. "Mark, you're not in a position to negotiate." Mark stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "You think I'm just going to let you take my wife?" Richard didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply raised a hand. The doors to the dining room swung open. 2 men in dark suits stepped inside. Anna gasped, her hand gripping Mark's wrist under the table. Richard's voice was calm. "I suggest you sit down." Mark didn't move. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. The 2 men stared at him with blank expressions, waiting. Anna's voice was barely a whisper. "Mark, please." Slowly, he sank back into his chair. Richard nodded approvingly. "Good. Now, let's talk about how this evening will end." Mark's hands were shaking under the table. He wasn't sure if he and Anna would walk out of this house at all. Mark's mind raced. The 2 men in dark suits stood by the door, their presence heavy, their expressions unreadable. Richard sat back in his chair, confident, relaxed, as if everything was already decided. Anna's grip on Mark's wrist was tight. Her fingers were cold. "So," Richard said, swirling his wine, "here's how this will go. Anna comes with us. Quietly. No struggle. No trouble." His eyes flickered to Mark. "And you? You get to go home, Mark. Safe. Unharmed." Mark clenched his jaw. "And if I say no?" Richard sighed as if disappointed. He nodded toward the 2 men by the door. "Then things get messy." A deep silence filled the room. Mark's mind screamed at him to do something, but what? He was outnumbered, unarmed, in a house he didn't know. His options were limited. He looked at Anna, searching her face for a plan, for a signal, for anything. Anna took a slow breath. When she spoke, her voice was controlled. "Richard, let me talk to you. Alone." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "You know why," Anna said. "This isn't his problem. It's between us." Mark stiffened. "Anna." She turned to him, her eyes soft but firm. "Trust me." Mark didn't like it. Every instinct told him not to let her out of his sight. But what choice did they have? Richard studied Anna for a long moment. Then he gave a small nod. "Fine." He glanced at Marielle. "Take Mark somewhere comfortable. We'll talk." Marielle stood gracefully, gesturing toward the door. "Come, Mark." Mark hesitated, looking at Anna one last time. Her fingers brushed against his under the table, just for a second. A silent message. Then, reluctantly, he stood and followed Marielle out of the room. Marielle led Mark down a dimly lit hallway to a study. It was smaller than the other rooms, but just as luxurious. Wood panel walls, leather chairs, a fireplace that crackled softly. She gestured toward a chair. "Sit." Mark didn't move. His pulse was racing. Anna was alone with Richard. Was she in danger? Was she making a deal? What was she planning? Marielle sighed. "You don't trust us." Mark let out a sharp laugh. "Should I?" She tilted her head. "You trust Anna." Mark frowned. "Of course I do." Marielle smiled, but there was something sad in it. Even now. Mark's hands clenched into fists. "What are you saying?" She walked to a small cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a cigarette case. She lit one slowly, inhaling before speaking. I'm saying," she exhaled smoke, "that you don't know everything about your wife. And maybe, just maybe, she's not telling you something." Mark's stomach twisted. "You're lying." Marielle shrugged. "Am I?" Mark's thoughts spiraled. Was Anna really just trying to protect him? Or was there something else? Something she wasn't telling him? He had to get out of this room. Had to get back to her. Mark glanced at the fireplace poker resting against the brick. Heavy. Sharp. A weapon. Marielle watched him, amused. "Are you thinking of fighting your way out?" Mark met her gaze. "If I have to." She chuckled. "You're brave. I'll give you that." She took another drag of her cigarette. "But Richard is smarter than you. And Anna." She smirked. "She's smarter than both of you." Mark's skin prickled. He had to move. Before it was too late. Mark's heart pounded. His eyes flicked to the fireplace poker. He didn't have a choice. Anna was alone with Richard, and whatever conversation they were having, it wasn't just about the past. It was about survival. He lunged. His fingers wrapped around the iron poker, heavy and cold. He spun, ready to strike. But Marielle was already moving. She didn't scream. Didn't panic. She stepped back gracefully, as if she had expected this. "Oh, Mark," she murmured, shaking her head. The door swung open. One of Richard's men stepped inside. Mark didn't have time to think. He swung. The poker connected with the man's shoulder. Hard. The man stumbled, grunting in pain. Mark didn't wait. He shoved past him, into the hallway, running. The drawing room. Anna and Richard stood by the fireplace. Richard's back was to Mark, but Anna saw him. For the first time that evening, relief flashed across her face. Mark took in the scene, Anna standing stiffly, Richard's posture too relaxed, like a cat playing with its food. Richard turned, sighing. "Mark, that wasn't very polite." Mark tightened his grip on the poker. "We're leaving." Richard smirked. "I don't think so." Anna's eyes met Mark's. There was something there, something urgent. Then she moved. She grabbed the wine bottle from the table and swung. It shattered against Richard's temple. He staggered back, cursing. Anna lunged toward Mark, grabbing his wrist. "Run," she gasped. They bolted. Mark's hands were shaking on the wheel. His heart hammered. Anna slumped in the passenger seat, breathing heavily. "You're bleeding," he said. She gave a weak smile. "It's not bad." Mark swallowed. "Anna, tell me the truth. All of it." Anna exhaled, closing her eyes for a moment. "I was part of them, yes. But when I left, I didn't just take the money. I took something more dangerous." Mark glanced at her. "What?" Anna hesitated. "A list. Names. Accounts. Everything." Mark's stomach twisted. "Why?" She looked at him, eyes filled with something deep and unreadable. "Because they don't just sell information, Mark. They destroy people. I wanted out, but I also wanted to end them." Mark's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. "Are they going to stop?" he asked. Anna looked out the window at the dark road ahead. "No," she said quietly. Mark inhaled sharply. The night stretched before them, unforgiving, uncertain. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not yet.